and now they're overseeing it.
Just what happened? What's the problem with Moyboy dump?
The problem with Moyboy is the toxic waste in Moyboy. The amount of it, we don't know exactly what's in it. We've heard reports of different toxins being in it, but we're not sure what. And the potential, the catastrophe is that the city's drinking water could become contaminated by it, and the whole city could be poisoned.
Here's where I read the books from the secretaries who were trying to warn their bosses about the reservoir leaching. There was mention of there's certain chemicals, can't remember the names exactly, but it's a hazard. The secretary was telling the bosses that there was leaching under the Patton, and that she was trying to tell the bosses, but it kept saying to no avail. For a few months, this same secretary, I don't know who she is. I've read it and look, there's evidence everywhere.
What's these receipts for?
This is all the dump. Whoever dumped stuff out here, the receipts are here for what was dumped. No matter who was it.
And what did you say about the secretary?
The secretary wrote letters to the bosses warning them that whoever was checking the reservoir where everything was being fly tipped by DuPont, that it was cracked and was leaching under the Patton, which is our drinking water once again. And every time over a space of like 4 or 5 months it said to no avail. So obviously that secretary was well aware of the dangers that they were causing and about the scale of the matter, and they every time says no to no avail. So obviously the bosses knew what was happening and just ignored it, knowing it was all going to just come to a standstill. But if there's anything they're salvageable. Like her books was all here, and she wrote clearly that she was trying to warn them, but nothing was done obviously. Well, they're charging them £1,000 a tonne, and one day they done 18 tonne. There's Custer, Derry City Council, all the council stuff. It's averaging, whatever it's been done, it's averaging £1,000 a tonne.
So somebody's being paid £1,000 per tonne they dump companies' waste here?
Yeah. There's professionals in tyre recycling. I don't think there's such thing. There was 1,000 tyres burnt here one night, and the fire brigade wouldn't even come over the gate because the place is so toxic. So they were aware of it.
I'm here today to talk about Moyboy Road, the environmental disaster that's sitting on our doorstep on the edge of Derry, and give a brief history of it essentially. And from as long as I can remember, even as a teenager, that landscape was a contaminated landscape. There was a lot of dumping going on there. But in the last 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years ago, the problems became much more serious, with failures of regulation both in the planning authority and indeed our environmental regulator, the Environment and Heritage Service as it was then, and now the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, that led to the situation where we now have in excess of 1.5 million tonnes of illegal waste sitting on the edge of the river.
Greed. Tell me about greed.
Well, greed's one of the driving forces, I suppose, in politics, but particularly in business. When you look around you at not just local things, not simply at Moyboy, but look at the whole waste industry. It's a fantastically lucrative industry. And I think the majority of the population is, well, waste can't be worth anything because it's waste. But actually, there's an awful lot of money to be made disposing of waste, not just in this country. Always remember, what business was Tony Soprano in? Tony Soprano was in waste management, as he called it. He had all the contracts in New Jersey. So there's, in that context anyway, there was gangsterism associated with waste. I'm not saying that exists everywhere, but we live in a society with more and more waste, and it has to be disposed of somewhere. And that creates the market for it. Governments want to get rid of it. They can't have it, or they're not supposed to have it. Piling up sort of on their own patch. So contractors come in, and sometimes it's very urgent to get rid of waste. So they have to be paid for their speed as well as everything else.
Obviously, going back a number of years ago, and I can't say exactly when, because I'm not sure, there was a legal dump there. It was legal. Now, how that grew and how that expanded and how that got to where it got to today, it evolved over a period of time, a long period of time. And people knew about it, but nobody copped onto it until it was exposed, and it was too far gone by that stage. So there was people charged with offences on it, but that's irrelevant. What's happening now is it's sitting there and has been affecting their water. It'll continue to affect their water.
Moyboy dump was discovered in 2013. It's one of the biggest illegal landfill sites in all of Europe, and it runs adjacent to the River Faughan, which is an area of special scientific interest and protected under European law in terms of the Atlantic salmon population and the general sort of ecosystem and environment down there. It was discovered under Operation Sycamore, which was launched by the then Environment Minister, Alex Atwood, which discovered large-scale organised crime in and around the Moyboy Road dump.
What was happening on the site was that these unauthorised quarries, they did not have permission, they were not regulated, were creating vast voids by taking out the sand and gravel, and ultimately then the illegal waste was being backfilled into those holes and covered over by some of the sand and gravel that was extracted to conceal the illegal dumping on a colossal scale.
There was multiple issues in relation to a gravel extraction company that operated there and a number of other waste management companies, and some of the planning permission was retrospective and wasn't in place. What was discovered was the biggest illegal dump of over 1 million tonnes of waste. I think the biggest concern for us and the public is not just the devastation that the dump can cause to the wildlife and the destruction on the environment and landscape, but the fact that the River Faughan supplies 60% of the city and district's drinking water. It's abstracted at the Carmoney water treatment plant, and the water's taken directly from the River Faughan. And despite all assurances from NI Water and the government, I think there's a real deep concern out there in the public, and it has never been adequately addressed.
everybody drove past and seen all the escape lorries coming through here. All the household waste would have been processed and whatever, no. But it was all a smoke screen to get the big money from the chemical companies. You know.
Tell me this, where would the chemical waste would come in here too?
Yeah, well,
and where would they put that?
Here, the chemical, anybody I talked to was doing fly tipping, done it at night time. And they done it in the reservoir up here, and then the reservoir at the back. You know, and that's the reservoir that the girl who will come forward when she sees this video. It was warning their bosses about the leaching from the cracked reservoir, and it was leaching into our drinking water in the fan. And it was chemicals that they had to dump at night. They were so toxic, and everybody was everybody's afraid to speak who was doing this fly tipping.
So the chemical waste was taken from this site and dispersed in the surrounding fields?
See, at night time, the chemicals wouldn't have came through the household. It would have went straight from dew pond to the reservoirs at night time.
And covered up
everywhere
then?
Was surrounded, people with walkie-talkies, everything was locked down, no way.
This was going on, for at least 5 years, day after day. Trucks going in. This wasn't a fly-by-night operation. This wasn't being stuffed, a lorry coming and dropping stuff off in the dead of night, and then going away again. This was being done in broad daylight. And it's just not credible for the council, the Department of the Environment and so on. It's just not credible for them to say, we didn't know about it. We didn't know that any of this was happening.
Well, it's like anything. When you turn around and realise something's getting done and contaminated and they're getting away with it, everybody flocks from everywhere to Northern Ireland. And they're coming down, well, go down to Derry and dump all this shit. Because everybody else is dumping it.
That people en masse will demand that something be done about it. I think there is a rising anger in the Derry area about Moyboy and rising frustration with the fact that this issue has been highlighted now for a number of years. And yet, you go out there today, there's been no change in the situation out at Moyboy. If you walk through it now, it's the same as walking through it a couple of years ago. So it's a scandal and a disgrace.
We do know that, for instance, when it was first closed in 2014, the risk of contamination that was quite extensive. So there was over £1 million spent by the department taking away surface waste and taking away significant amounts of leachate to ensure that it didn't contaminate. But now when you get there, and I'm sure I may be proved wrong in this, but now when you get there, it certainly seems as if it's just been abandoned.
That's all Moyboy on there too, yeah.
It's all dead, isn't it?
Aye, totally. All them old buildings there, look.
The main yard's down here now. People went out of their way to do this.
Aye.
This wasn't
Premeditated.
Exactly. This didn't happen overnight.
This is heavily organised.
Lorry after lorry. It was military precision. That's what it was. Military
Shocking.
precision.
Shocking.
I don't know how the land's going to recover, whatever will recover. People's not angry enough about this here. How did it happen? How did they ever let it happen? And how could they? And it's the fishermen too in the fishing. The city's drinking water. It's a travesty. It's a bloody travesty. And it's also a legacy. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from this. But will they apply the learning? Why would they when there's profit on it? Well, they do they see him again? The thing get away with? Oh, look at the sheds now. Where exactly food you like? I have no words. I haven't got no words for this here. And there's only we can see the tip. It's underneath. That's the problem with this.
No, the Moyboy dump is situated beside the River Faughan, which is an area of special scientific interest. And despite the river being afforded some of the highest protections in Europe, it's just hard to imagine, the feelings that the government have allowed to happen down there in terms of the sheer scale and size of the dump. And we're talking about 1 million tonnes of mixed waste, domestic waste, building waste, and other waste that hasn't really been identified yet.
In terms of what's in the dump, there's been quite extensive surveys carried out by NIEA, and certainly they would find a lot of domestic waste and builders' rubble. But because of an ongoing criminal prosecution, they have been unable to say exactly the full extent of what's there. But what we do know from published data that they provided to the Moyboy Road stakeholders group in 2014 is that there's significant amounts of leachate were being produced, and leachate is a very toxic soup made up of the corroding wastes. When it interacts with groundwater, it can be highly polluting, much more dangerous, for instance, than slurry. And if that gets into the water system, we can have serious problems.
Yeah, the Moyboy Road dump is adjacent. It's cheek by jowl with the Faughan River, which that's where we depend on for 60% of our water, sort of in the city. Now we're assured by the Department of the Environment, by Northern Ireland Water, by everybody official that we talk to. They said, look, we've checked all this, there's no problem, and the water you're drinking today, which ultimately comes from the Faughan, that is clean and sweet, and there's no problem with it.
But what we do know is that interaction with the groundwater and the decaying waste within the dump is producing chemicals such as arsenic, cadmium. There are various insecticides that they have, dangerous insecticides that they've noticed in the dump. Cyanide has been detected in some of the samples. At what scales or how dangerous they are, we don't know, but the fact is that they're there and should never have been there is of a concern in itself.
And they even have asbestos pipes, drinking mains pipes. I don't know if you're aware of it, but the drinking mains pipes are asbestos that run up from Derry all the way down to Lough Neagh, as far as I know. I got an MLA in my area to ask questions, and the DOE came back with that it's all right to drink asbestos. It's only breathing it that's a problem. Now, I don't know anybody in their right mind who would feed asbestos to a child, and yet it's actually in the drinking water. So, to me, it's all quite shocking, and it leads us really to where you guys are all at right now and what you're questioning down up in your area in Derry. Because if the water is already as bad as I'm saying it is, and you should be filtering your water right now, can you imagine with all the accumulation of the stuff you're also being bombarded with, from industry, from the military, from all the other sources of this, and then you've got landfill dumps around you. You've got all these different things happening. So you can only expect to see the health of the population diminish. There can be no other outcome.
Stop for a second.
Sure.
These contaminants been found according to Central report in the Moyboy dump. Just address them for us if you can.
Arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, lead, nickel, mercury are all present as the major ions: aluminium, iron, manganese, and sodium. Well, Sorry? This is what's been found, contaminants that have been found in the Moyboy dumps.
The mean, I first realised the dimensions of it when I was taken out by members of Unit Youth 3-4 years ago to walk around Moyboy Road and just to look at it and to see the way there were what's called lagoons, little ponds in the middle of it, and you could see these huge bubbles coming up, whop, 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 sort of the size of a dinner plate, these bubbles coming up. And I didn't know what's in there. It smelled like methane to me. It certainly wasn't healthy. That's the moment I got involved in it.
No, this is one of the lagoons at Moyboy that was used as part of the waste processing process. It's pure contaminated. They've identified toxins within that lagoon there, and then it actually feeds into a stream, which in turn is a tributary of the River Faughan. So it's concerning, but further back there's actually 2 lakes much larger than this water body here, but it's just everywhere we walk on this site there's thousands and thousands of tons of domestic black bin waste. Basically what you were putting in your black bin is everywhere underneath us, and other waste that we don't even know. There's some parts of the site that haven't been explored. The NIEA have about 47 boreholes in right across the site, and what they're doing is actually testing, they say, on a regular basis for the flow of leachate and groundwater contaminants. But as was already discussed, the list of chemicals that's already been identified as flowing into the Faughan, which supplies the city's drinking water, is very concerning. And all them mounds up above there, that's all black bin rubbish. So when you're trying to explain and talk to people about Moyboy dump, it's not realistic. All that can be knocked down tomorrow. What we're talking about is what's under the ground from here, spanning 46 hectares. Everything my brain.
That's a borehole. There's about 47 of them scattered around this whole area. The problem with Moyboy is that you only see the surface. You don't see what's below the surface. All the contamination really is. But that's how they're monitoring it. And that's what they're doing about it. This problem. Continuously. And I'm saying, take this out. Dig it out. Find out what's in there and bury it somewhere else safely. Safely. It's not safe here at the moment. And the danger is the potential to contaminate the water of this city. And the far side of that road, it's a large part of it dump. It's just the whole area. It's a catastrophe. It's just a mountain. You take people here in Moyboy, they just see this here and say, oh, it's bad looking. It's underneath the problem is. It's underlying. It needs unearthed. It needs to be established what is down below where I'm standing. And that's a real problem. That's a real issue with Moyboy dump.
The question is, to what extent can it be guaranteed that there isn't going to be a seepage from Moyboy, so the leachate that comes out from all that buried rubbish? I mean, how can we ensure that that's going to remain in place, given the possibility of flooding, given that we know this is a flood-prone area?
Everyone remembers the floods of August 2017, where the embankment at Moyboy, in terms of the embankment with the Faughan, was actually breached. And as a contingency plan and an emergency plan kicked in, the water treatment plant at Kilmoney had to be shut down. And in a subsequent meeting of Derry City Council, Derry City Strand District Council with the NIEA, one of the officers involved in the project says that they had been lucky with Moyboy so far. And what a statement they make. It's not about luck, and we can't rely on luck. Yeah. It needs to be cleaned up now.
The dump itself, and in fact the materials, the illegal waste dumped there, comes to within 5 metres of the edge of the river. All the more concerning because the ground there is made up of sand and gravel, so it's highly permeable and water runs through it. So there's a very great danger that leachate could, for instance, either seep through the groundwater, and we already know from NIEA's information that the leachate is interacting with the groundwater, but also, in fact, from flooding. In 2017, in August of that year, we had a major flood event. And what that actually did was it breached the banks. So the river ran into the Moyboy dump and flooded the land at the lower level on the floodplain where a lot of the waste was dumped. When those water levels dropped, all of that water ran back out into the river. Now, there was no evidence, we're told, of it causing any harm, but the fact is that danger lies there and remains there, because with increasing climate change and increasing extreme weather events, what we are going to end up with is significant flood events more and more often. And indeed, only last month did we see another breach in the Moyboy area of the flood defences, just fortunately this time on the other side of the river, so it burst into the field, but that could so easily have been 20 metres on the other side of the river, which again would have meant that Moyboy would have been flooded. So that we are now left with a permanent legacy, a permanent risk of flooding and the harm that could cause should we experience another extreme weather event.
If you have flooding over, this vast, buried, vast, hundreds of thousands of tons of waste, and we don't know what's in the waste. We can't know, since it was dumped illegally. There's nobody checking it. There's nobody standing at a gate saying, "What have you got there?" and checking it out. So we don't know what's in there, and because we don't know, it's very difficult to take on trust or assurances from anybody, including the Environment Agency, Northern Ireland Water, and all the rest of them, the Rivers Agency, the Lochs Agency, all of them. None of them can be sure that what's out there is safe.
Nobody knows what's in the dump completely. So, and that, so toxic waste, industrial waste, household waste, a whole range of things. I mean, the Northern Ireland Environmental Agency have done some boreholes and some tests, but knowing fully what's in there and the extent of the problem, I don't think they can ascertain that. And then in terms of clean-up or remedial works, the cost of that can't be determined because we don't fully know what's in there. What we do know is it's very close to the River Faughan. It's very close to the drinking source for a large percentage of the population in Derry. It's very close to the river where, there's fish going up and down, and actually the land there's been polluted as well. It's having impacts, vets have said, on local sheep. So we're knowing there's a whole range of environmental impacts there.
I want to show you something now. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lush looking green fields, and I can't see one animal.
Why is there no animals there?
Obviously it's too toxic to graze.
We're literally 20 seconds from the depot, Moyboy depot.
We're sitting on the stream that's leaching the chemicals from the depot to the farm.
And this land is barren. There's no animals on it because it's too toxic.
It must be. Why wouldn't it? It looks perfect for animals.
As you rightly pointed out, over there, it's a no man's land, right? Everything's dead. Nothing's growing. Does people not ask why? What? The people aren't being told. The vast majority of Derry people don't know what's actually there, and that's what we need to do, and that's what we're here to do.
And one thing that's often glossed over or missed in this story is that under a scheme that was peculiar to Northern Ireland called the Aggregates Levy Credit Scheme, operators who that were carrying out quarrying operations could apply for tax relief in relation to the amounts of aggregates that they produced. And when that was stopped in 2010, that was a tax relief of £1.60 per tonne. So in terms of the extraction of aggregates, I'd say 200,000 tonnes per year, which was what Moyboy suggested it was extracting. That's a significant amount of money over time. But what is quite extraordinary here is that money was being paid to an operator at Moyboy, or that tax relief was being given to an operator at Moyboy on the basis of environmental improvements that they were supposedly carrying out on the site. And having inspected the file, bizarrely there is a letter from the department expressing its delight at the extent of the environmental improvements that were carried out on that site at the same time that it was being stuffed with hundreds of thousands of tons of illegal waste. So that shows the dysfunctional nature of a regulatory authority that didn't bother to check what was happening on the site, but was taking an operator's word that everything was environmentally compliant and making money out of that.
And that's what we're dealing with out here at a local level. And the environment has taken over. It's probably affected my health and well-being and my mental health as well. Because I'm facing it on a daily basis. And I'm hearing from young people the mental health. Only last night again, I'm getting phone calls from young people with mental health, wanting to do something about it. And it's this area, it just looked...
We were down in Strathfoyle there, and what's there? All these dumps and other industrial places. I'm shocked of everything that's around that area.
Yeah, it seems to be quite a high concentration of, industry around an area which would house a lot of people, possibly a lot of people in lower incomes that would have lower life expectancies anyway, which would have greater health problems. I think that's a trend, not just here, but across the world, where it tends to be industrial sites are set in poorer parts of communities, where people actually don't have the voice and the strength sometimes to fight back.
The pollution is everywhere here has been dumped upon the whole area. The pylons are here. The electricity goes down. The docks, the whole area is diagnosed for industry.
That's the most shocking.
And there's very little room left for social housing. And we're continually, and I mean continually up until last week, campaigning to stop a new local development plan. Not industrialise this place further because it's an industrial prison.
Where's the who's caused what pollution is it, and where's it coming from?
The pollution here is coming from industry. DuPont have a contaminated dump in there. You can't get access to it. It's barbed wired off.
No, we're just here off Electra Road, this is all belongs to DuPont. This is actually a historic closed landfill. That means it's no longer in operation. It goes back to the 70s and 80s when the British Oxygen Company was here. But all we know is it's a toxic landfill site. What's in it, we're not sure.
Whose is it?
This is DuPont.
DuPont's grounds.
So this is their landfill site, and it's just sort of pointing out and illustrating to people that you've got one of the biggest toxic dumps in all of Europe at Moyboy. But in addition to that, you've got 22 tarry waste sites, which came about as part of the dumping of tar from the British Oxygen Company. And then here on this site, there's a closed landfill. It's been closed a number of years now, but no one knows what's in the site, and we're just adjacent here to the River Foyle, so it's another concern that people have on top of Moyboy. It's just, if you were standing here looking at it, just looks like a nice nature ground or wildlife ground, but obviously that's sort of shielding from what's underneath and under the ground, a bit like Moyboy. Everything above surface you can't really find a problem with. But the question needs to be asked, what is in this site? Who monitors it? Is there a programme of remediating it? Has it been cleaned up? And what's in there? People have the right to know these basic things.
Do you know what concerns me? There's fresh tyre tracks come up on it.
Aye, there is fresh tyre tracks coming up on it, alright. Totally.
That's very recent, isn't it? It's a closed site this year, it's locked. So who's the keys for it? Who's still using it? What's been put in it?
Aye.
Yeah.
I know it spans at least 2 miles in that direction, but in terms of the content, obviously it's chemical waste, but in terms of what those chemicals are, we don't know, but people of Derry and Strabane have a right to know.
it's still not been given. It's still not been given the urgency that it requires. And particularly, I would look at the government departments based in Stirling. I don't think either they haven't grasped the dimensions of this, which they would be culpable for, because there'd be no great secret about it. If they took it seriously, they would know.
Our MLAs and our councillors aren't going to stand up and do anything for us at the minute. No, at the minute they're not. They don't seem to be, because they're more interested in getting bamboozled by bullshitters.
The MLAs are getting paid. They were paid for, 3 years or whatever. They were off. And what did we get for it? We've got nothing. And now they don't even have power. They have more power than they know. They're just not using it.
Correct.
That's what's going on. They could make this all go away. They could make this all happen, but they're not doing it. And the civil servants, to me, this is like Yes Minister. Did you ever see that TV show? Yeah, where it's really the civil servants who are running the whole program, and the ministers are just signing off on everything. And I think that's exactly what's happening here, because the ministers don't understand the chemistry of what's happening. They don't understand who's telling the truth, and they don't have time. They're busy. So they don't look into these subjects in depth. I put in parliamentary questions through an MLA, and it came back and it was a non-answer. I said, but they didn't answer my question. He says, well, that's what they gave me. That's all I got. I said, well, go back and get my answer. And he goes, well, they don't have to answer me. Mm-hmm. Who's running this place? Of course they have to answer you. How can it be anything else other than that? Otherwise, we don't have a government here. We have a group of civil servants running wild. They have to be made accountable. Somebody has to sign off on these things.
Have you been down to that, my boy?
Have I? Yeah.
What's your feelings on it?
Yeah, well, I was horrified the first time I saw it, because it was there was a big pond there and it was bubbling up. So it was kind of really scary. And then the place that's closed over is very close to the river.
The way Moyboy site has been left now is in essence it's a desolate landscape. It's a contaminated landscape that requires significant remediation. It appears as if people have just up and run and left everything there. Derelict buildings, receipts, paperwork blowing around the site and within the building.
But I've got actually a bit of the incinerator. We call it, the incinerator was lay across. If you want to go out and see through that gate there's an alleyway that you can't see it from the Google Earth or nothing. It goes across that back lane where the pipe was, and then that's where they used it. They had an incinerator there. I happen to have about a 4 foot length of the pipe. It's just, you go over here now, you'll see. To the second RSD down, there was a big horizontal burner and a big incinerating box in the end. I don't know what they were burning, but obviously they wanted to get rid of it. But they applied for an incinerator and were refused. They had one here in Patton, and so whatever they were burning was those, but obviously important enough to go against the planning permission, and I put one here anyway.
So they were told they can't have an incinerator here, but they put one anyway?
I didn't know they weren't allowed one until last week at the meeting, where Dicey says that whenever they applied for one, they kicked up a fuss because they didn't want one in the area. But they had one hidden along here.
And they were incinerating chemical waste?
They were incinerating something. If somebody can do like a chemical analysis on the pipe, I'm more than happy they keep on the pipe at 4 foot of it, put away. Walked away from this, and there was millions of pounds worth of stuff here. They just walked away.
There's what?
There was millions of pounds worth of materials everything on here was worth a lot of money, like, and they just ran away. Like.
Obviously, they made that much money.
You can see it.
They don't care.
Who am I angry at? I'm angry at the Northern Ireland Environmental Agency for letting it happen under their watch, and they has duty of care to do that and preserve the drinking water of the city. More importantly, they put everybody at risk here. It's not just a dump anymore. It's, how could you put it? It's, I've described it as the festering sore in our landscape, a blight. You know, it's a blight in our civilization, and it's an insult to everybody in the city that it happened. And people's stupidity that let it happen under their watch. How could they?
And you should not hide and speak from there. Because at the end of the day, you know, it affects everybody. Like. Absolutely.
This meeting, when you called this meeting to actually let the public know what was happening. So I don't see why there should be any. I mean, if he's really called a meeting for that reason, then surely you would want the rest of the public, you know. I think it comes down to a pretty simple thing. I mean, if you want to let the public, if you call this meeting to let the public know where public stands, then why not let the
We've been out here, we've held right.
Listen, I am a meeting here,
so we're not denying, certainly not going to hide.
When was the last one you held?
When was the last one? It was.
Well, how do you feel as if you're okay standing there and they turn around and saying, you're going to develop a site out there, let's get tons and tons. We've documentation, right, of £1,000. £1,000 a ton was getting paid to a company, City West. That City West company, right, and there's 55 ton lorries getting in there, 100 plus lorries a day getting in. That's £550,000. What's going on? It doesn't matter what those guys, what I'm saying is what's going on. No, there's nobody ever went like to say the stuff that they were dumping there. It's totally and utterly toxic. It's hazardous waste. It's right on our water supply. It's on the thing. Nobody understands that. No, you're an educated man. You're an educated man.
What somebody made, I don't know. I particularly.
Well, I think if you're coming here to inform
one of my
public,
technical
then
experts,
you should know
know
about
that's
this.
one saying, you know,
I'm very concerned about that, to be honest. As a
technical
member of
meeting
public.
tonight?
Yes, sir. So brought them.
But there's also 29 other British Oxygen Company dumps out around the waterside,
Yeah.
and they're all actually.
Yeah.
They're all actually, what's disturbing about it and what the public know now is the fact that these 29 dumps are placed on streams that are running under River Common, our drinking water. You not find that incredible? He's the expert, you're the expert. I find it just disturbs me a little bit. Completely
But I can bring the experts in there that will know exactly what.
But yours, are you not an expert?
No, I'm the project director. I'm employed.
You not see.
I'm a project director, I'm an expert. I'm not sure it was.
You need not bring all these things to your attention.
Saying if you fix boats or you're a joiner, you can't understand how the whole castle's built. You just understand the castle's built, and there's loads of boys working on it.
If I was directing a project and involved what you were working with, then I would need to know all the background towards it.
I wouldn't be letting me in the job block to get jobs.
Pretty simple.
That's my point.
Pretty simple, good one.
You're going to get the job eventually because you know what's going to happen. You're coming here trying to sell something to people that people know is totally toxic.
But the Northern Environmental Agency has now custody of the dump, and they're monitoring it and evaluating it. And I don't trust these people to do that. And that's where I'm coming from, an honest integrity position. They let it happen, and now they're overseeing it.
Ultimately, the responsibility for that site lay with the Derry City Council, and as Eamon said, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. And following the discovery of the dump, Stormont commissioned a review was carried out by a guy called Chris Mills in 2014 around that time, and he made a number of recommendations in relation to a systematic review and do what he described as failures in terms of regulatory failures on behalf of the council and the NIA. And recently, when Minister Poots took up the position as Environment Minister, he actually stated that he would be more inclined not to hold a public inquiry because he wants to concentrate funding and resources within the NIA and implementing the recommendations outlined in the Mills report. One of the implementations that's outlined in the Mills report actually calls for Part 3 of the Waste and Contaminated Land Order, the Northern Ireland Order, 1997, to be enacted. And if that was enacted properly, it would mean that all councils in the north would have to not only document and record details of land that is contaminated within their city and districts, but also put in place proper action plans to remediate those sites in the interest of public health. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
And the length of time that we've waited on a public inquiry, which is being pushed back further or in fact denied, and in terms of a remediation strategy that will tell us how this sort of desolate landscape is going to be remediated, it really does feel as if we as concerned citizens for the river and for our water have been abandoned here.
And the people let this dump happen under their watch and evolve under their watch as the people that's now overseeing the capping of this dump and containment of it, which is totally diabolical in my view. And to me, they're just swarmy in what they're doing. I can't believe a word that comes out of their mouth.
I was going to say to you, it links into the water. What do you think needs to be done to rectify the poison, in your opinion, that's going into the water?
Well, the first thing you need to do is get accurate testing done so that you actually know and have levels that you can confront them with. Because in my experience, they go into a shutdown mode where they won't give you any information. They deny everything and everything's fine.
Who's they?
Well, I'd say the government as a whole, and that's really being kind. It's really civil servants, because the government, there is no such thing as government. That's just a paper fiction. It's civil servants who say, I'm the government.
How can we get done the water testing independently as a community group on the ground here?
The only, well, as my own opinion is you have to send it abroad. You're going to have to send your chemical, to have the analysis done abroad, because the government give all the labs, local labs, a lot of work. And I think it's going to be very hard to get an accurate reading or something you can actually take to court and be sure of. So personally, I would say you go abroad for your testing.
But who regulates yourselves as you're saying you're doing daily tests? Who would regulate you for these daily tests?
The water regulator.
As in, you do it yourself, you do the tests?
Northern Ireland Water carry out the analysis, yes.
Right, so
and
they
then we
regulate
report
themselves?
The results of all our testing.
So they regulate themselves?
Or maybe there.
But everything is getting monitored.
We would assess those
I don't understand what the monitoring system's doing, because they're not finding what we just already...
We already know it's there. So why are you not finding this stuff?
No,
it's there.
Is it corrupt?
It's there.
Is the monitoring corrupt? Is there some kind of,
What do you think that says about the system?
Oh, the system's totally broken. It's totally captured, in my opinion, but that's just my personal opinion.
Captured as in under the control of the people that are poisoning?
Well, industry. Industry seems to come first, because why have these things arrived on every river in Northern Ireland? How come there's a factory on a river? They don't do it for the scenery. They're doing it because they want to have they want to contaminate. They want to stick stuff into the rivers. I can't see any other reason for them being there.
What about the 29-hour British Oxygen Company dumps that were actually set up in 1860? They says they were scattered randomly over the waterside. 29 dumps, I believe strategically placed, every one of them on streams leading under River Faughan. Well, I was given this by council. I was given the map of these dumps by council, who've had it for 30 years.
And it's in the public domain.
It's in the public domain. They know about it.
We can pick up this topic. No.
Why would they?
It's always the drinking water rivers.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem, because we're talking about your drinking water, and since you're 76% water, this is kind of essential. And they're putting these. They always give these factories a place near a river, and I've never seen it anywhere else. You don't see them inland, you know.
And I know they have a job to do in trying to clean it up, but they've gone the wrong way about it. I want this stuff removed safely from this dump and taken out of there, so it's not going to pose a threat it continually poses to our city's drinking water. And that's simple to me, and that's straightforward. And I'm saying, how can I trust you to do that after all that's happened around your watch and on your watch? You know, it amazes me. And I get so angry and I get so passionate about it. And I think to myself, am I wasting my breath on these people? There's nobody listening, you know.
We're now almost 8 years on since the dump was discovered. No waste has been removed. There hasn't been a public inquiry, and people right across the city district are alarmed at the inaction and the lack of an effort to remove all waste and for a public inquiry to happen.
How do you remediate the site? How do you get rid of this waste? How do we get rid of it without creating other dangers and so forth? All that should be on the immediate agenda, and it's not. It's not on the immediate agenda because it has more or less been decided on principle. You can't move it. It has to stay there. Well, if it has to stay there, we want to know sort of how you're going to protect us from it. The first thing that you would notice about Moyboy is that nobody has been held responsible for it. No charges have been made, but there aren't charges to deal with the main issues here. But the charges which have been made are being used by government and local government and all sorts of agencies. And it's just not credible for the council, the Department of the Environment and so on. It's just not credible for them to say, we didn't know about it. We didn't know that any of this was happening. Have the eyes to look at it only. So that when local people and small local groups, like the Enoch Youth Forum and others, came along and said, wait a minute, what's going on here?
In terms of who's to blame for this, obviously, a lot of it must be laid at the feet of those that set out to commit an environmental crime for the purpose of greed and no other reason. But we also have to reflect on the fact that our regulatory authorities and our planning authorities have failed seriously here, because when you have professional incompetence masquerading as expertise, events like Moyboy Road are the result. And until such times as we have a public inquiry that addresses the reasons why this has happened, then we can expect to see perhaps other events like Moyboy until we find out what went wrong and it's put right.
I've just been a private campaigner. I've done this all off of my own bat, out of my own pocket. And so I've looked into these things. I've asked questions. How hard is it? These guys should be asking those questions. They should be pulling those ministers in or pulling in the civil servants and saying, what are you talking about? When they give them a report, they're always inaccurate. There's stuff missing. They never tell you about the campaigners who are fighting against them. Shouldn't that all be in those reports? But it's not. Never is. So there's got to be a change here. We need an actual grassroots change of what's happening. And unfortunately, that's what we're faced with. But we have to gang together as citizens and start demanding a better version of government than we're having, because there's no other way forward. We can't go ahead with the people we have because they're not doing the job. It's just my opinion.
In my life's journey, Moyboy is featured through the work I did, not only here, but in other places. And I found that I had a moral duty
an obligation to see this through and shout and roar about it. I wasn't very popular at the time. I met a lot of enemies, and I fell out with a lot of people. But if I didn't do it, and Paul didn't do it, and other people that's come along now, who would? You know, we did it because we care. Simple as.
It's time to wake up, people. The biggest disaster that's going to happen is just come down the road. It's an accident waiting to happen. But boy, that storm, that rain last week, this storm this week, what next? What's it going to take before people say, dig it out, get that stuff out? The most prolific salmon river and probably in Europe. You know, this is ridiculous. And we're sitting here and we're talking about it. I think we are capable of keeping our heads together as people, and the whole city should be concerned. And I want to see this here Gillard get stronger, bigger, and better. As I said, get together, people. Sorry I got a rant here, but we've done that much stuff in here for them. We're getting frustrated. You probably could say, I'm a frustrated campaigner, but at least I am a campaigner. Thank you.